Donald Trump, the controversial former president of the United States of America, spent the entirety of Monday holed up at the Trump Tower in the city of New York. He was said to be consulting a crack team of lawyers ahead of his arrest and historic appearance at the Manhattan lower court complex for criminal charges on Tuesday. One of those charges include hush money payments to the tune of $130,000 made to porn star Stormy Daniels, who says the two had sex at a celebrity golf tournament a decade before the 2016 presidential elections of the US. Yes, the very election that made Donald Trump the most powerful man in the world. From then and now, the 45th Commander-in-Chief of the US has become the first president to face a criminal case, the first to be arrested by the New York City police, who per protocol will have to take his fingerprints and his mugshots, and the first to be produced before a criminal court. From takeoff to arrival, Donald Trump's journey from Florida to New York has received blanket coverage across the US, and by the looks of it, it may seem like a stunning reversal of fortunes, with many asking whether the sun has truly set on the monarch of Mar-a-Lago. But bear in mind, the twice impeached Mr. Trump is no stranger to controversy. He has emerged relatively unscathed from charges such as insurrection to criminal conspiracy from the January 6th Capitol riots investigation and the Mueller probe, respectively. So it remains to be seen whether this court appearance in New York could impact Trump in any meaningful way. For what it's worth, it could end up resembling political theater, with the Donald raking up much-needed electoral points before the Republican primaries. And with that, let's dive straight into the discussion. Joining me on the show is Professor Scott Lucas, foreign affairs expert, live from Birmingham, UK, and Ambassador Deepak Vora, former Indian ambassador to US and many other countries. Let me begin the proceedings with Professor Scott Lucas. Talk to us. The simple question I'm going to ask by beginning this discussion is, what next for Trump, Professor Lucas?
Well, I'll give you a simple answer in terms of what will happen in about, 4.5 hours. And that is, in a Manhattan courtroom in New York City, Donald Trump will be indicted on criminal charges. Now, those charges have not yet been publicly revealed. They'll be unsealed by the judge at that time. But we know from reliable sources who have let leading American outlets know that these will be felony charges, or called Class E felony charges, which is the least serious felony, if you can have such a thing in New York State. And there will be 34 of them, 3-4. And I think that number is significant because 34 indicates we're not just talking about one or two alleged falsified business records because of the payoff to Stormy Daniels. We're talking about multiple falsified business records, which could include other matters about Trump Organization and Trump's tax and business affairs. Now, each charge individually, the Trump people will say, oh, it's not that much. We're blowing it out of proportion. 34 allegations, 34 counts is quite significant if this proceeds to trial.
Quite significant if this proceeds to trial. Ambassador Deepak Vora, talk to us from a political perspective. Finding a president in this situation it has never happened in the US.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be with you on your channel, sir. I learned so much from you. You put it across so eloquently, and our guest from England has also expressed himself beautifully. Shri Donald Trump, whom I've met more than once, was a geopolitical arsonist internationally. Within his own country, he came to power promising to sweep or drain the swamp within the Beltway. He managed to do that quite well. Now he's the casus belli of another grave and unprecedented national drama. So amongst the other charges, one is that he directed hush money payments to a porn star during the 2016 presidential campaign. And that could have had some kind of an impact on the outcome of the elections. Boy, $130,000 impacting the US presidential elections? Give me a break. For many Americans who disdain Trump and his riotous single term, the present legal case could be a sign that finally he's being called to account for his rule-crushing behavior, and that everyone, even former presidents, are equal under the law. That is the strength of America. On the other hand, is he actually getting equal treatment, or is he being treated worse because of his fame and political aspirations? There are no easy answers, sir. The complexities of arraigning a former president under close Secret Service protection means that this is no ordinary case, even if justice suggests that he should be treated like any other citizen. Is an infringement of accounting practices and possible campaign finance violation sufficiently serious to lock up a former president who has already said that he's running again? I don't know, sir. This might just be a potentially flimsy case built on a somewhat untested legal theory linking campaign finance violations to Trump's alleged hush money payment, etc. There were many women, by the way, in the Me Too movement also who called out Trump. It didn't seem to impact on it. Now, this is a grand jury, and I don't want to go into an explanation of what grand juries are, but these are citizens empowered by the United States federal or state law to conduct legal proceedings. The only other country that I believe that has grand juries is Liberia. All the other countries have abandoned this. So what is going to happen to Donald Trump? Sir, I've always referred to him as Mac Donald Trump because of his business acumen and his ability to mobilize people. I
just like
Borat.
Back. And if just like Borat, just like Borat, you refer to him as the McDonald.
and he might just bounce back because sympathy will be on his. You don't lock up a guy for, sir, forgive the language, a one-night stand with some.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's the point you're making. I'm going to take this across to Professor Scott Lucas. Professor Scott Lucas, there is this specter of, is this entire grand jury proceeding, you had Ambassador Deepak Vohra say that, grand jury exists in the US and Liberia. Grand jury indicting a former president, is that too harsh? You've had the Republicans across the board, even people who, Trump, who has fallen out with, former Vice President Mike Pence, even Ron DeSantis, hitting out at this entire grand jury proceedings that have been undertaken against Trump.
Let's take 2 points here. First is, this is the American legal system as it has developed over 250 years, almost 250 years for everybody. Yes, we happen to have grand juries, which is a bit different from other places in terms of the pre-trial phase, but that is part of the American justice system's idea of that it is your peers who try you. It is your peers who decide if the case goes forward, not simply an executive or an official or a judge, your peers. Secondly, and the ambassador, I know he's doing a good job of trying to say, well, there may not be nothing here. We have to wait and see the evidence. We have to wait and see how many cases there are. But yes, falsifying business records is a felony. It's a felony for anyone in the United States to do that, especially if the falsification of business records was done with the intention of committing another crime. To not prosecute Donald Trump for this, to let this slide, would be to give immunity to someone because he happened to be the former president. And remember, we're not just talking about this case here that could lead to indictments. We are also talking about the case of taking records from the White House down to Florida and allegedly covering up that theft. We are talking about investigations both by the Justice Department and by a grand jury in Georgia about election interference and electoral fraud. And we're talking, of course, about the investigations into whether there was incitement of violence around the Capitol attack. Donald Trump is known as Teflon Man, and he's very much at getting away with it. He did so over Trump Russia. He did so over Trump Ukraine. But we need to be very clear what's going on here. This is the question of the integrity of a legal system versus Trump and his followers who are gaslighting. They will portray that Trump is the victim. They'll say that this is unjust, a political prosecution. They will blame the district attorney, the prosecutors, the judge who Trump insulted over the weekend, indeed the entire U.S. judicial system.
Right.
Do you choose
but
the
if
system,
it was only Trump's followers, I'd be okay with it, Professor Scott Lucas, but you're talking about other people, other Republicans across the board who seem to have taken outrage to this entire proceeding.
Let's explain why they've done that. So if you talk about House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who's talked about outrage, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy pledged loyalty a week to Donald Trump after the Capitol attacks. He criticized Trump, and then a week later, he went down to Florida and pledged loyalty. He got his place as House Speaker in part because of Trump's support. Former Vice President Mike Pence is running for president in 2024, but he wants Trump voters to vote for him. So he goes along with Trump and says this is a political prosecution. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis does the same thing. In other words, they join the gaslighting for their own political ambitions. To represent them as having an equal point of view as that of the American legal system, nah, This is political interference, political manipulation. It's not actually a legal opinion that these men are expressing.
Fair enough.